Welcome to Thieves' Cant, a tabletop gaming podcast with your hosts, Jeremy Shane and Chris White.
Welcome in, welcome back. It is Thieves' Cant for Thursday, March 5th. I'm Jeremy Shane.
And I'm Chris White.
And as always, thank you for listening, for subscribing at thievescantcast. You can email the show, thievescantcast@gmail.com. We hope you do so. We'd love to hear from you. The last couple of Thursdays, we've been talking original RPG mechanics.
Pre-AD&D.
Right? We've been talking dungeon turns. We've talked random encounters. Things that, people obviously still use. Mm-hmm. And there is a bit of a renaissance happening with some of these mechanics. But they went by the wayside for a good while for a lot of gamers.
Yeah. Things have gone in a different direction, more storytelling focus. Things like Critical Role and things like this are focused on narrative and all these things.
Yeah, they put narrative first.
Yeah. In the meantime, I think a lot of these games and modern D&D have really gotten away from these rules that were there for a reason and serve a real purpose. And so with the old school essentials and the, like a lot of people playing the basic expert stuff, we can see how important these things are.
This has been kind of an education for me because, I am, if I'm being honest, I am kind of a narrative first gamer. What my eyes have been opened up to the last couple of weeks is that the narrative can still emerge from these mechanics.
It's not either or.
You're not canceling out the story side of the game.
Right. But it is a definite change in the game. And because what it seems like is with all of these systems that we've seen, in a lot of ways, the game starts running itself, right? Today we're going to start talking about reactions. And you can see why this is such a departure from the DM trying to handhold every encounter and handhold the players through every room in a dungeon or every bit of exploration that they're doing, right? This is the difference. And so when we talk about reaction, we're talking about reaction tables, right? So, when we mention random encounters, there's a reaction that goes along with that. And different games are going to do this in different ways, but it's going to generally be a roll. So just like you're going to have a random encounter roll, you're going to have a reaction roll. And so the idea here is, what is that initial disposition of what you've encountered, right? And again, I want to emphasize that random encounters, and I don't think we mentioned this last time, don't just have to be monsters. It can be wandering monsters, certainly, but make sure, it's going to be other things. It may be a group of soldiers. It may be, a huge encampment of orcs. It may be a dragon. It could be all sorts of things, right? And different encounters are going to be there, but there's going to be a reaction. Now, generally, violence is for some creatures going to be a much greater opportunity, right? So that's going to be your most likely role, but it's not always going to be the role. And so this is where encounters can really change. So I just want to give a quick example. I know you love kobolds and goblins, and I was on...
Look, let me just clarify. I don't have a problem with kobolds and goblins. What I have a problem with is every single low-level adventure defaults to you're fighting kobolds and goblins. And what is the most commonly played scenario at any gaming table? Because games don't last very long. It is low-level games.
Right. And so this is going to relate into that really well. So the example that I found online, I thought it was really kind of cool, was basically this group of 4 kobolds was approaching the party that was resting. They were asleep, camped out in the forest, right?
Okay.
And how
are they approaching?
Random encounter, sneaky, right? Random encounter. They see the PCs first. They approach sneakily. However, when the reaction roll is made, it's actually the roll comes up that they are friendly, a friendly disposition. Why? Okay, well, and this is where it's kind of good, I think, to have an idea of maybe why that would be, because the party earlier on had been fighting some goblins. And so, quick thinking DM has these kobolds approach the party, and basically their disposition is, hey, the goblins kicked us out of our little lair, would you help us?
Yeah, the enemy of my enemy.
Right, exactly. And so this makes logical sense, right? And kobolds aren't maybe the most intelligent race, but they're smart enough to figure that out.
Sure.
And so instead of this encounter that could have involved a sneak attack and, a disruption of rest, instead turns into a possible negotiation. And that's where a lot of reaction comes in, because it says that not every encounter has to be a combat. In fact, if possible, it could turn into negotiation, could turn into an ally.
This is an important note, I think, that you bring up, because last week when we talked random encounters, one of the first things that we discussed was, why are people prone not to use random encounters,
mm-hmm.
right? And among those reasons could be, well, I don't want to have another combat.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as you just said, that reaction table allows for the possibility that this is not a combat situation,
mm-hmm.
or it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And what I like about this is it can go both ways. One of the YouTube channels I highly recommend is Questing Beast. Great channel, great ideas. And he was talking about, random encounters. And one of the things he talked about was he'd like to see more dragons, right? Like, the game's called Dungeons and Dragons. Why aren't there more of them in the game? And as random encounters, wow, right? Big deal. But think about it. That random encounter could just be a flyover, right? You just see the dragon.
You see signs of it.
Right.
Maybe you don't even see the dragon itself. You just know that the dragon has recently been around.
So I think with your random encounter table, and always look at the creatures on it and consider what could be their motivations. If I roll on that reaction table, right, again, as a DM, I'm letting go of some of that control. What would be the motivation? And so I was thinking about, what if on the random table we're in an area where dragons inhabit it? So, you might have red dragons. You might also have silver dragons. Well, what if you roll a random encounter with a silver dragon and it comes up as hostile? Whoa, okay, this seems out of character, right? As a DM, I'd be like, no, that's never going to happen. But what if it does come up hostile?
That's the one result I'm going to ignore.
Right. But that's the thing. This takes a lot of that away. It's not everything is on the dungeon master. Instead, it's this narrative is playing out. So let me think about that for a minute. Why would a silver dragon be hostile to this group of adventurers, right? We're talking about a good dragon that likes people. Okay, maybe that's your motivation. Maybe the village near its lair, where it loved to hang out and spend time with the people, was sacked, and people were murdered, and they found out that it was a group of adventurers that did it, and they just happened to be doing a flyover, and guess what? Well, here's a group of adventurers.
Yeah.
Maybe he's coming in hot. Right? It doesn't mean that you can't still talk your way out of that situation, but this, so in this situation, a good character, a good monster that you would think would be a peaceful encounter comes in ready to fight. That doesn't mean you can't talk it down. So it goes both ways, right? Now, these reactions obviously involve thinking creatures, okay? So they're going to have to be able to make that decision. So undead, nope.
So a minimum intelligence, if let's just put it in a D&D light here, they've got to meet a minimum to actually justify a roll on the reaction table.
Right.
Okay.
There's some creatures you're not going to be able to negotiate with. Maybe it's just a hungry monster, but even then, people encounter bears in the woods and they don't always get attacked, right?
Right.
Sometimes that reaction is maybe it's well fed and just curious. So it really depends. But yeah, thoughtless creatures, slimes, oozes, things like that, if the opportunity presents itself, they're going to attack. It's almost reactionary. Undead are the same way. Now, one thing that I did note was, for example, in Shadow Dark, they allow you to add your charisma bonus to that reaction roll. I did some searching online to see what people thought of that, because I don't really like that.
On the
initially.
surface, just hearing it without any thought, my initial reaction, no pun intended, is I don't like that.
Yeah, I mean, charisma, you could view it as physical attractiveness, but generally I don't think of charisma as just an aura of this guy's cool, right?
Well, it takes away, it puts all the focus on the characters, which I'm a proponent of in many instances. Mm-hmm. But we're talking specifically about this other entity right now.
Well, what I did like, I saw an alternative, I can't recall where, I apologize, but it was basically they only apply that bonus if the players win initiative and one of those players uses their turn to try to engage with the encounter, whatever it may be, the creature or whatever. Then, if they're successful in doing so, then that charisma bonus gets added to whatever that reaction roll was. I like that because now there's a player investment. The only other point I wanted to make was what I think should impact this is the player's previous actions. For example, if you're raiding the goblin lair in your low-level adventure, the goblins they know what you're doing. They are aware that you're raiding the goblin lair, that you're there to kill them, right? So I would not even make a reaction roll.
No, I mean, at some level, the ambiguity is gone.
Right.
But as long as it remains, the reaction table needs to answer a question.
Yes.
If you already know the answer, you don't need to make a roll.
Exactly.
All right, so the reaction table, a great way to add a little more depth to your RPG experience, to your encounters with creatures in the game. Maybe it's combat, but maybe it's something more. But if it is combat, and this is where we'll take this conversation next week, we've got to factor in the concept of morale. Chris, I know you have further thoughts on that. So that'll be next week's Thursday show. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. Join us again tomorrow as we wrap up the week. Thanks for listening as always. thievescantcast@gmail.com. I'm Jeremy Shane.
And I'm Chris White.
So long.
Thank you for listening to Thieves Cant. Email thievescantcast@gmail.com.